So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I know everyone's a bit tired, so I'll try and make this short and sweet. So where did this begin? So in 2021, CyAN, which is an organization that I'm on the board of, was alerted to the potential dangerous deterioration of the ecosystem around researchers of zero-day vulnerabilities, which effectively puts the security of the global digital environment at risk. CyAN leveraged its network and looked for the most cost-effective way to mobilize the international community towards adoption of regulations to protect researchers and incentivize responsible disclosure. We identified a group of key stakeholders, from individuals to international government institutions, including the OECD, and Florian, who will present after me, is representative of that. And they all share common goals and values. And the role that we took as CyAN was to engage the emerging community and nurture its growth and create momentum through to 2022 and beyond. So in early 2021, one of the members in our vetted network, with a proven track record, but I can't disclose his identity, alerted us to this deterioration of the ecosystem around researchers of zero-day vulnerabilities due to two diverging forces. On the one hand, a continuous increase of the market demand for vulnerabilities, and on the other hand, persistent pressure from legitimate vendors to deter researchers from disclosing the vulnerabilities they have identified. Researchers can face significant legal risks when reporting vulnerabilities to vulnerability owners in many countries, and vulnerability owners can threaten researchers with legal proceeding instead of welcoming their vulnerability reports. And so this legal risk, aggravated when stakeholders are across borders, creates quite powerful disincentives. So our first step was co-organizing a webinar, and this was at the French FIDE forum, which is, I guess, the largest cybersecurity forum in France. This is 1 year ago, which demonstrated the validity of the concerns. And building on this success, we actually had a number of media engagements, and we were in various media channels across the globe. And here's where I'll start to click through the presentation and show off some of my photography. There's a nice black and white one for you with a bit of mystique there. So yes, I mean, we saw that this was a very large issue. The stakeholders, who I'll move to a screen a bit further below, will just give you a sense of the type of people who are aware and interested in creating a mechanism which acts as a supportive vehicle for something like OECD in their work to define and develop best practice and recommendations to then be handed to the various member countries. What we required, and I think as Florian will discuss in his presentation, what was kind of lacking was this middle support and a representation not for the industry, not for the government, but the individuals themselves performing this research. And this could afford, say, better protections and an understanding of the types of tools they could use. Let's say, for example, an NDA, which is tailor-made for a security researcher when they're interacting with a vendor that they've identified a vulnerability with. And we wanted to build on this and draw heavily from the OECD. Now, the OECD, as Florian will describe, has put a huge amount of work and research and time and effort into developing an excellent policy recommendation document. Again, Florian will discuss that in detail toward the end of the presentation. And thus far, it has been we're up to the point now where we have done a number of presentations. We've gained significant stakeholder support, connecting researchers, civil societies, software owners, editors, governments, international government institutions, and CyberSec as well. Very happily, they've decided to, or Kosciuszko Institute has decided to support as well. And that's a bit more about the initiative and some of the steps. There's the list of participants. Hopefully the text is large enough for you to see, but as you, many of you may be familiar with a number of those names there, highly influential people in this field. And so again, it really speaks to the importance of this issue. How can we pragmatically adopt legislation to encourage enhanced legal frameworks, better safe harbor for the raft of security individuals around the world, so that they don't feel or they don't feel threatened, and therefore hopefully we can stop some of the bugs that may end up in black markets or grey markets. We have representation from some of the bug bounty platforms. So yes, we hack, for example. That's one of the largest bug bounty platforms in Europe. Siemens is just hard committed as a funding founder for this initiative as well. They would be distributing this to their Charter of Trust members, which includes numerous very, very large industry partners like Airbus and Atos and IBM and Mitsubishi and NTT, etc., etc. There's representation from smaller security research firms. Edward Farrell on the top middle-ish right, he featured in one of our media articles. He's a security researcher based in Australia. He tried to go through a CVD process. It was a government institution and quasi-government institution, and was rebuffed. So how can we build mechanisms which ensure that some of these submissions are going through, being processed effectively? Kieran Martin, I think he's spoken here a number of times, is the former CEO for the National Cybersecurity Centre. He's very encouraging on this topic as well. I'll get into what he would be type of role he'll be playing at a later stage. Christopher Painter, who I believe is a member of CyberSec and also the president of the GFCE, very supportive of the initiative as well. So that's a really good rundown. Oh, sorry, last thing, the certs. Not listed there is a gentleman called Art Magnon from CertCC. He's provided us some tips. He's also consulted with Laurent Bernard, who is the author of the paper that Florian, his colleague at the OECD, will run through. And he's provided some great tips from a cert perspective. Koichiro Kamiyama from Japan, JP Cert, CC. So you can see it's significant and it's timely. That's what we've decided to name it. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we abbreviated it to CYRC.network. That's still up for debate. Again, this is we're operating on a very transparent manner, and it is still to be formed. So up until this point, this has been my 20-hour-a-week pro bono contribution to the industry. Within the next, say, 4 weeks to 6 weeks, we will have established an official association with stakeholders contributing to the creation of that and the definition of how they see this fitting in with their industry, which is really their industry. Those are some of the aims. Nothing too exhaustive. It's effectively a rallying cry to ensure that this is at the top of the agenda for policymakers, and that the work that the OECD has done, the incredible work that they've done, is distributed, and there's a bit of noise around it as well, so it's a top-line agenda. Those are some of the principles that we adhere to, and we will continue to adhere to. This is, for simplicity's sake, it's a PowerPoint, so excuse me, but we wanted to categorize some of the activities that we will be performing. Now, I mentioned Kieran Martin previously. He's now a professor at Oxford University. So one of the number of projects that we'll be performing as part of this association will be to distribute research questions to some of the students, so Kieran's students. David Hoffman, who was listed on the previous panel as well, from Duke University, Institute Kosciuszko with the research capacity, and also KO University with a friend of mine actually, who's one of the smartest octogenarians you will ever meet. His name is David Farber, and his nickname is the grandfather of the internet. He's also an emeritus professor at KO University. So amongst these universities, they will have a set of research questions that then they can distribute to their various students and compare and contrast results and then feed that back to the OECD and vice versa, and also access potentially data sets that they can receive from, say, BugCrowd and some of the larger bug bounty platforms. So that's quite exciting. And each of those other ones, we leverage some of the stakeholders involved to, I guess, rattle the cages in those various areas, and also build toolkits as well. The aim is, with the OECD working at that top layer, making their recommendations, the idea is that we are we're focusing on the individual researchers, and that's where this activity looks to nurture the bona fide ethical researchers trying to do good work, and assist them in that. So where are we now? I think CyberSec is listed there, perfect. And FIC as well, we have a number of other engagements. We're also in fundraising mode. As I mentioned, Siemens has hard committed to funding this initiative, fantastic. So we have industry representation there. Michael Daniel, who was Obama's former cybersecurity chief, cybersecurity czar, and currently the CEO for the Cyber Threat Alliance. He's rallying industry partners as well. So it is gaining a huge amount of recognition, very exciting. And the governance model, this still needs a tiny bit of ironing out, but we're trying to ensure that there's representation and voting rights that are distributed, I guess, fairly amongst the stakeholders who are closest to the issue. So you can see represented constituencies would be, one person representing the academic, the academic constituency, platforms, code owners, system owners, and associations. Although we still need to have figure that out. It's still a work in progress, but certainly very well advanced. That's me on the right. That's my French colleague on the left, former digital crimes at Microsoft, and also on a couple of boards for Encryption Europe and other types of initiatives, combating CSAM. And together we have put in an inordinate amount of our free time to make this happen, and we're quite chuffed with the success. So that's my piece. I'm 2 minutes over my estimated 10 minutes, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll turn you over to Florian, who'll be able to give you the OECD's side, which is what we're supporting.
Thank you very much, Nick. I hope you all hear me well. I'm very sorry I can't be in a Katowice with you. I would have loved to attend it, but unfortunately it wasn't possible. So I hope to at least here online present a little bit on the OECD work on vulnerability treatment. I will, due to the lack of time, skim over some details, but I will provide you links where you find more information. And I would also like you to keep in mind, as Nick very perfectly pointed out, nothing happens in a vacuum. And so this work is, of course, embedded, and we try to align this work with as many stakeholders as possible. Next slide, please. So first I would like to very briefly give you an introduction about the OECD. So the OECD's goal is better policies for better lives. And it's an intergovernmental organization that has 38 member countries and collaborates with more than 100 countries. It maintains close working relations with other international organizations, and also substantially contributes to G7 and the G20. It has a strong business focus, collaborates with trade unions, civil society, and also the technical community. Next slide, please. So, of course, as also the economy and society as a general becomes more and more digital, the importance of digital security policy increases. And the OECD has, on the one side, the Working Party on Security in the Digital Economy, in short, SDE, which I chair, which is embedded in the Committee on Digital Economy Policy, or short CDEP. Now, this organization reports to the OECD Council and has the goal to increase security without inhibiting prosperity. And sometimes this might seem a little contradictory, but we strongly believe that both is actually possible and achievable. The current areas of work are in digital security of critical activities, digital security of products and services, the responsibility of business actors, especially also when they respond to attacks. I mean, common topics are the hack pack, or what is a responsible response, and also the security of communication networks, including new and interesting technologies that might address some of the challenges with existing infrastructure. The main audience is the policymakers. So while technical knowledge is of course key to discuss the matters, it's really the idea to give policymakers the information and the tools so that good and beneficial policies can be instantiated. Next slide, please. It's also, I would like to give you a very brief overview about some work conducted before I dive into some of the details of the actual recommendations. The analytical work on the vulnerability started in 2019, and the expert group that is discussing these topics has more than 90 experts. There have been various workshops, and also the objectives actually were to understand the challenge and identify the areas where policy action is needed. And there have been some deliverables which were delivered by February 2021 and then continually taken forward. One is the background report on the topic of vulnerabilities. There is a main report, which is an overview for policymakers. This is a 30-page report, which should enable policymakers to grasp the topic and take it forward. And there's also a short policy note. You can find more information about these on oe.cd/security. Next slide, please. So when looking at vulnerabilities, the topic might look simple first, but actually it's much more complex than one would estimate from just talking about the vulnerability per se. So on the one hand side, vulnerabilities is not just about 0 days. It's really about considering code and system vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities, unknown vulnerabilities, how to address them, how to deal with them. It is not only about coordinated vulnerability disclosure, but more about a holistic approach. How can we actually treat vulnerabilities? Because in the end, the vulnerabilities will define the attack surface, and the less vulnerabilities that are there, the less the attack surfaces. Also, you might be familiar with bug bounty programs, which is an important mean, but it's not a silver bullet. It's one tool of many, and there are many ways to actually test for vulnerabilities and also test whether a fix in the end was successful. It's also not only a technical problem. There are economic obstacles, such as existing gray markets for vulnerabilities, or some incentives that might encourage you to close vulnerabilities or not. There's risk about downtime when you patch system. There's legal obstacles. So are there safe harbors also for the vulnerability researchers? There's cultural difficulties. Sometimes vulnerabilities are taboo. They cannot be openly talked about. It's always the question in the room, who's at fault? And these are all things that make this topic really challenging. Also, the assumption that government is always neutral is is often challenged, and actually governments need to think about how they can generate trust. Next slide, please. So the key findings for policymakers are that not all vulnerabilities are equal. Vulnerabilities are a fact of digital life. They're not going away. There will always be vulnerabilities. The question is how to treat them, how to deal with them, and how to establish processes that reduce risk. And also, significant economic and social challenges prevent stakeholders from treating vulnerabilities effectively. So it's important to get these obstacles out of the way, to address legal risk, and to also address the cultural side of that. Next slide, please. So the draft recommendation on vulnerability treatment was developed by the OECD Council as a recommendation. It's expected to come with a good practice guidance document based on existing guides, and it's a quite mature draft as of end of last year. And the recommendation, or a recommendation as the OECD puts it forward, is an international legal instrument adopted by consensus, so-called soft law. And you can actually take a look at the database of the OECD legal instruments. There are in total 173 recommendations across various topics in force at legalinstruments.oecd.org. This recommendation about the treatment of vulnerability should be launched at the OECD ministerial meeting end of this year, which is happening in Spain. Next slide, please. The draft recommendation will mainly cover 5 fields. One is about clarifying the responsibilities. The second one is about mainstreaming good practice. The third one is the very, very important one about creating safe harbors for researchers. So how can they actually also present their research finding, the vulnerabilities they find, in a manner that does not lead to them being sued or to them being in a position that is uncomfortable for them, that would inhibit them doing their important work. At the same time, how can we make sure that this knowledge is not abused? And then about fostering trust and intensifying domestic and international cooperation. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that this is basically one of many things that we discuss. We have other areas. In total, we have 7 packages on digital security recommendations that form the OECD policy framework on digital security. You see it here on the slide. Again, if there's more interest in it, of course, you can find more information about that. So I would like to conclude with the next steps. Next steps are actually pretty straightforward. There's the ministerial I already mentioned in December 2022. And this will be a great opportunity to elevate the topic. And then, of course, once this milestone has been achieved, we need to keep the ball rolling in 2023 and 24 and beyond to continually address the topic in the hope to actually ensure the prosperity of the digital economy in order to reduce vulnerabilities, reduce risk in the digital space. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And so, as you can see, the amazing work that OECD has done, and I guess CyAN is aiming to ensure that that message is spread to as many stakeholders as possible, and that the theme keeps on rolling and getting bigger. And it's a pleasure to welcome Michał Rakowski, CyberSec Program Director, for the lovely invitation to present the initiative here, and also for Institute Kosciuszko's participation in this as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick. And hello, is it working? Okay, great. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Florian, for the presentation. And the Kosciuszko Institute is very grateful for the invitation to join the initiative, and will proudly and with all its capacity do all we can to support it. And you know, especially given the fact that the institute is basically an NGO, so coming from a civil society side of things, I think it's extremely crucial to engage with those initiatives that not only talk about stakeholder engagement and multi-stakeholder engagement, meaning that we have to, you know, we have to put the public sector talking with the private sector, and that's basically it. That makes a good cybersecurity ecosystem. But as it happens, so cybersecurity researchers are also stakeholders in this process, and we believe that they should not be overlooked. And actually, when they are overlooked, very bad things can happen to your cybersecurity ecosystem and to the way you deal with cybersecurity challenges. So that kind of initiatives that come really and look at very crucial contributors to the cybersecurity process as researchers are, but also at the same time the most vulnerable ones, because very often they do not have institutional backing, they do not have organization standing behind them that can support them, that can protect them. And given the nature of their work, they are very much exposed to different forms of pressure. And we have, if you follow the market and if you follow the development of the sector, you have many stories about bad things or maybe unpleasant things happening to people who are just trying to be good at the job. So we are very grateful for the introduction. Thanks for coming here, and we will proudly support you and provide you with all you need from our side. And congratulations on the idea. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much. Thank you.